Hello, BookTube. A while ago, David Wiley, of esteemed memory here on BookTube, a wonderful booktuber, came up with an idea for a series of videos. I'd love to see a lot more people take up this idea than have done it, but it's a great idea. Of your bookshelf essentials. You have tons and tons of books around you, thanks to my book shopping last week. I have even more books around me than I usually do. But some of them are different from others. Just like your children, there are some that you just can't stand. And there are some that you really, really like. Those are bookshelf essentials. And David Wiley's idea was, show us your bookshelf essentials and tell us why they are that. I wasn't planning on making a bookshelf essential today, but then I got a Voxer message from Michael K. Vaughan saying, hey, I'm making a bookshelf essential, you should too. And I said, I wasn't really planning on making a bookshelf essential today. And he started screaming and said, I've got 20,000 subscribers, I can buy and sell your sorry ass. And he's right. so I'm doing a bookshelf essential. And this one of the ways that you can tell that a bookshelf essential is a bookshelf essential is if you just keep going back to it. If there's a tiny part of your brain that is always more or less engaged with it, and you keep going back to it. This is one of those. I've shown this on this channel many, many times. It's from the late 1990s, so it's not a work of the ancient world or anything like that. But I can't do without it. It's a great big oversized book, and it is Books of the Century. This is edited by Charles McGrath and the staff of the New York Times Book Review, and that's what this is. It's a century or more of extracts from the New York Times Book Review. Starting, I think, when they review Henry James. I'm pretty sure that's the first thing in here, is a review of, is it The Spoils of Poynton? Let's see. Yeah, The Spoils of Poynton from 1897. So this volume, I think, was more or less meant to look at a century of the New York Times coverage. And of course, the New York Times book coverage has continued since then. It is the most influential, for good or ill, it is the most influential book coverage in the English-speaking world. And it's changed over the decades. In the very earliest book reviews that flooded the pages of the New York Times, this is nothing like how long it could be. And of course, it's gone on from there for another half century. But in the earliest book reviews in the New York Times, they followed the standard of the day, which most book review sections did not drop until long after they did, which is that the reviews would be anonymous. The idea being that it's the journal that's reviewing the books, not an individual person. That habit of unsigned reviews stuck around, especially in the UK, for a long time after the Times dropped it. The Times dropped it right away, more or less right away, in favor of letting you know who's doing this reviewing. That helped them. It paved the way for them to have not only letting you know who's doing the reviewing, but also famous people reviewing books, which I'll say more of in a minute. I've said plenty in my time. The UK press held on to that habit for a while, and the only place that really still does it are the trade journals in the publishing world. Library Journal, Publishers Weekly, Kirkus. Those reviews that fill the back of every one of those issues are not signed. And there are a couple of really good reasons for that. They are reviewers for the trade journals are constantly reminded by their editors that you're speaking under this imprimatur. You are not reviewing the book yourself. Kirkus is reviewing the book. So your review will have a format. You won't be able to take a flyer. You won't be able to be impressionistic. You won't be able to even to be snarky. Beyond a certain point, you won't be able even to be snarky. You've got to do service to the book in a very short space of time, a very low word count, because your review is going to be used in the industry. If you write for, let's say, the indie branch of Publishers Weekly, your review is going to be used in the industry. People in the industry are going to wonder if they're going to use that review to determine whether or not to read the book, whether or not to buy the book, whether or not to pre-order the book for their library or their institution or their school. Those reviews very much have to be institutional. Otherwise, they would lose something. The mainstream reviews, not so much. Not only because, of course, a 1,000-word review of a new release is obviously being written not by an institution, but by a person, but also because if the reviews start to be named, you, the reader of reviews, can start to realize which writers you trust. instead of stumbling blind. If you're getting an institutional reviewer, maybe someone who's only a book reviewer and who doesn't have an outside gig, is not, in other words, John Updike. If you're getting an institutional reviewer and you take one of their reviews and the result is very positive, you're going to look for their next review. You're going to be on something of their same wavelength. You start to see that blossom here in this volume as well. The volume isn't the best books of the century. There are a lot of famous books in here, and there are too few not famous books in here for my taste. I think this could have been a much better cross-section of stuff. I think the editors here were looking for books that you as a reader would still recognize, which is artificial and misleading. Most of the books that, despite what the Yaddo crowd would like to believe right now, most of the books that are reviewed anywhere are going to be forgotten in 10 years. You only have to look at the collected book reviews of... I reflexively looked in that direction at the bookcase that used to be collected book reviews, but they aren't there anymore. They've been moved. If you look at the collected book reviews of someone whose reviews have been collected because of who they are, if you were to collect the book reviews of Edna Wilson, or Jacques Barzun, or Evelyn Waugh, or Virginia Woolf, if you were to look at the early book reviews of Virginia Woolf, you will know her name, but you will know almost none of the names of the books she's reviewing, because that's the way of the world. Books come and then they go. I'd like it if this were a more faithful representation of that. The reason why it isn't is connected with the thing that I mentioned earlier, which is that the Times very early on fell in love with the idea of getting a recognizable name to review a book. That's a bad idea. A very, very bad idea. It inevitably compromises the end result. There is no way to get out of that gimmick with your integrity completely intact. If you get a famous novelist to review a new novel, well, you're not going to ask George R.R. Martin to review a new novel set in Byzantine Rome. You're not going to ask him to do that. Instead, you're going to ask him to review a big new fantasy novel. And you're going to do that specifically because his name has name recognition associated with big fat fantasy novels. The problem is, if he likes a big fat fantasy novel, he's helping himself. He's floating all boats with that like. And if he doesn't like it, he's hurting a competitor. Now, you might say that's absurd, because he's George R. R. Martin. Who does he have as competition? But it isn't always him. The example is usually much more easily found in lower rung game. Let's say you have modern contemporary novelist X who writes exclusively about meth-fueled drama in the trailer parks of Appalachia in the U.S. And you're the editors, because now it's become just institutional momentum. They don't even think about it anymore. The editors of the Times are not going to go to a professional book reviewer or even a semi-professional book reviewer. They're not going to do that. They could. If they want to do a lot of good, they could go to college freshmen, college literary journals, even high school seniors. Start somebody's career as a reviewer if they've got lots of talent. Instead, what they'll do is go to the author of a novel about meth-fueled antics in trailer parks in Appalachia, thinking that's a real cutesy-poo get. And what it really does is invalidate the review. Any review that comes from that is tainted. Because either that novelist, the one who's doing the review, is going to love that book, in which case that novelist is whetting your appetite as a reader for meth-fueled antics in trailer parks in Appalachia, which is going to help their own book, as well as the book under review. Either they're praising the book and it's having that effect, or they're damning the book and hurting a rival. There's no way for the integrity of the process to survive that kind of gimmick. And that kind of gimmick blossoms the more this book goes on, until it becomes ubiquitous. And I know for a fact, because I've been reading the Times almost as long as this book it covers, that wasn't the fact. What I think the habit I think the editors fell into here was to look for names. And I think there's a little bit of unthinkingness in that. So that by the end, this is a celebration not only of a century of New York Times book reviews, which is an amazingly impressive phenomenon. It is worthy of a celebration. But by the end of this book, it's not just a celebration of that. It's also a celebration of how cool they are. Look at all the names we could get to do the reviewing, whether they should be doing it or not. That is a negative in terms of book reviewing, but the reason this is a bookshelf essential is because it's usually a positive in terms of reading, in terms of reading the book. You're getting tons and tons of prose here from all kinds of well-known literary names, the examples of which will not exist anywhere else. You're not going to find, I don't even know, the literary figure of a bygone era, Hamlin Garland. You're never going to find his collected book reviews. I might at the Brattle, but you're not. And if you're interested in him, you're not. But if you were interested in him, well, you might find a book review of his in here. Same thing with the collected book reviews of better known names, Mary McCarthy, for instance. And figures like that, Lewis Auchincloss and a whole bunch of other people are in here, and you good luck finding collected reviews, even if they exist. The market is not interested in collected book reviews from anybody. So it's unlikely that you're going to find the literature that's in here from the well-known authors who are writing it. I might disagree. I might say, you editors over the decades, maybe you should have gone for more disinterested critics and fewer names who are inherently conflicted out. I might say that about the choices, but I can't deny the allure of the prose. This is a wonderful, wonderful reading experience. I'm not trying to be prescriptive here at all or restrict you in any way, but I would say that the wrong way to read this book would be to go through the table of contents and go straight to the reviews of books you know. That's going to be the natural thing to do, and I think in this case that would be a bad idea. I believe it or not, despite how this book seems to invite that kind of approach, I would say the way to read this is just sequentially. Just watch how the reviews change, and let that be the story, rather than the zingers or the praise that particular authors gave to particular other authors. Watch how the book reviews developed. For me, anyway, it's fascinating. But I go back to this all the time for a whole bunch of reasons, including even just stylistic reasons. Just if I've got something on my plate and I am commissioned to review it, and I'm thinking, this doesn't look all that promising, I might flip through the table of contents here, find something similar, and see what the reviewer made of it. What approach did you take? The huge benefit for me for the New York Times book review over a lot of other book reviews that I read is that the New York Times book review is very much for the kind of reader that I write for. The smart but not necessarily specialist general interest reader. Unlike, for instance, my beloved Times Literary Supplement, the TLS, will just as often have 1,000 words devoted to some untranslated work of Russian literary criticism. They will give 600 or 800 words to a catalog of Edmund Spencer trivia or ephemera from the Bloomsbury Group, things that the general interest reader is never going to buy. They're never going to see it. They're not interested in it at all. The TLS will still do it. If they think it has literary merit, they'll still do it. Whereas the Times usually does not do that. They usually won't go beating around in the weeds. Instead, they're looking for the books of the day. The books that people might be reading in the bookstores. I love that about them. Regardless of whether or not their approach sometimes irks me, I love that approach. I love that concentration of theirs on that audience. That to me, that audience is the only one worth writing book reviews for. The specialist journal's fine. You can have specialist journals all you want, and I found some of them very interesting. I used to subscribe to a whole bunch of them, including one that I loved that only published one issue a year. But when it comes to just newspaper book reviews, this is the kind of focus that I want. It's just that focus is going to tend to go out the window if you're getting a celebrity to windify about some book that they haven't read, that an assistant has described to them. All this might sound like I'm saying, why would this be a bookshelf essential for me? But I think this underscores that a bookshelf essential does not have to be a book that you unconditionally love. I don't unconditionally love the approach here. I'd love to see a new book like this. More Books of the Century or Son of Books of the Century, something like that. Let another editor take a crack at this, maybe give it a normal size and make it a nice big fat 1,000-page hardcover. Do another survey of the first 100 years and give us a generous survey of the following 40 years. That would be great. I don't think that would sell. I don't think there's any chance or any plan for any book like that, but I would buy it, certainly. But in the meantime, I've got this. And just picking it up for Bookshelf Essentials, just for this video, I lost probably half an hour just reading through here. just reading through this thing. This is the hardcover. I also have a paperback. I lost probably half an hour just because I touched it, which is a pure example of a bookshelf essential. So that's your bookshelf essential for today. I realize it's very niche. It's a collection of book reviews. I'm a book reviewer, so it might not have much appeal to many other people, but I love it. And that's what a bookshelf essential is all about. What do you love? What is the thing, no matter how weird, idiosyncratic it is, that you can't do without? Is it an Overstreet comic book price guide? Is it a badly outdated, dumb biography of Christopher Columbus or Martin Luther King or Martin Luther? I'd love to know. Feel free to do a bookshelf essential on what makes you smile when your eyes are looking over all your bookcases. What makes you smile when you see it? I'd love to hear it. I will do more. But I'm going to wrap this up for now, so I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.